All right, good morning, everyone. We are now live, so I'm going to get us started. I'm going to go ahead and call this Assembly Rules Committee meeting of the whole to order. We are scheduled today from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And we are going to go ahead and get started with a roll call.
Felix Rivera,
Present.
John Weddleton,
Here.
Amy Allard,
Here.
Christopher Constant,
Here.
Forrest Dunbar,
Here.
Crystal Kennedy. Ms. Kennedy asked to be excused. Suzanne LaFrance. Here. Cameron Perez-Diaz. Pete Peterson.
Present.
And Ms. Zalatel also asked to be excused today. Do you have a quorum?
Great. Thank you, Barbara. Okay, so as usual, if folks want to get in the queue, please put yourself in the chat, and if you can't access the chat, text me. And then folks in the room, just let me know, wave me down, and I'll add you in the queue. All right, and as usual for Rules Committee meetings, feel free to be informal. That is A-okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead and actually, I'm just going to take a quick 2 seconds to deal with the technical issue, and then we will get started. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get going. So we're going to start with a report from the Assembly Chair and Municipal Clerk. I'll go ahead and get started. So a few items for me. First is the Assembly office remodel. Things are going forward well with the remodel. From the pictures that have been sent to me, it looks like the project is on track to be done next month as planned. I also understand that the Chugacooga River offices are also moving forward and will hopefully be done around the same time as the Anchorage offices. Redo of the Assembly website. After the Assembly approved AR 2021-23 at our regular meeting on January 26th, the Clerk's office was informed of a project OIT is currently undertaking to redo the entire www.muni.org website. After consultation with Assembly leadership and the website working group, we've decided to wait until OIT finishes their project in June to use the funds approved in AR 2021-23 to complete any additional needed website improvements, with the exception of a couple of items. Those items being posting approved minutes and signed final versions of AOs and ARs in the public portal. The OIT project, from what I understand, will be a facelift of the website and added mobile capability, but not a change of content. Next is homelessness communications. Northwest Strategies is continuing to complete parts of their contract with the Assembly, including a docuseries, communications plan, and a draft social media post bank. Paid media, a big part of the contract, ended earlier this month. Letterhead, by now, all members should have reviewed and provided edits to the clerk's office for their letterhead. Reprographics should be finalizing those and sending you final versions very soon. Public testimony. We are continuing to make updates to the public testimony form so it provides the best information possible and lessens confusion for the public. After doing some initial work with OIT, the clerk's office has advised that a phone queue system would take too much staff capacity to run during the meeting. I've asked that we continue looking into other possible systems that will reduce dialing wait times during meetings while maintaining our current call-out model. Safety. Assembly leadership continues to work with the administration, APT, and Securitas, our security at the LUSAC, to implement best safety practices at the chambers. I'll keep updating you as this work continues, and you'll likely start seeing some changes, whether in safety drills, implementing safety minutes, or other items beginning in March. Assembly Member 101 training. Because of interest from some members, Assembly leadership has begun exploring the idea, emphasis on exploring, of an Assembly Member 101 training modeled off of a similar training the Anchorage School Board began doing late last year, titled, quote, "So You Want to Be a School Board Member," end quote, in which they walk through the responsibilities and duties of a school board member. That is all that I had to report today. Anything else members would like me to report on, or any questions? Yeah, go ahead. Suzanne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had talked about exploring a code of conduct similar to what Mr. Perez-Ferdia worked on with the school board. Is that something that we'll be taking up in a rules committee meeting, do you expect?
So that is something that I know Meg had talked about, and from what I remember, it appeared she had interest in spearheading. I don't have any details on where she is with that.
Thanks, Felix.
All right, not seeing anything else, then we'll go ahead and move on to the municipal clerk's report. Barbara?
Thank you, Felix. I've asked for Felix's indulgence because I have a little bit of a long report for you today. I usually tell you 3 things, but today I'm going to tell you 4. First, the first COVID-19 confirmed death in the U.S. was in Kirkland, Washington on February 28, 2020, 1 year ago this week. On that same day last year, I participated in a telephone conference call with CISA, the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. And as you may know, elections are considered part of the U.S. cybersecurity infrastructure. There were election administrators from across the United States, and we were talking about how to prepare for elections with the threat of COVID-19. At that time, the MOA regular election was about 35 days away. The second thing I wanted to tell you was the following week, the clerk's office, the election team, and the assembly leadership began discussing initial plans for dealing with the virus. Then Chair Forrest Dunbar and Vice Chair John Weddleton supported our efforts to introduce key legislation in March 2020, which, thank you to the Assembly, was approved and allowed the clerk's office and the elections team to evaluate the state of the emergency and to decide not to open or close vote centers to protect our election workers, our community, and ultimately protect the integrity of the election. As you know, 95% of our vote center workers in 2020 declined to work because of concerns about the coronavirus. As I'm also sure you recall, the Assembly passed legislation allowing the Assembly to have a quorum during an emergency if members participate in person or telephonically. This is prescient legislation a year later. The third thing that I want to tell you is that by mid-March of 2020, Anchorage hunkered down, and we have been in different versions of trying to work safely in the middle of a global pandemic since then. Even so, I want everyone to know that our very small group of dedicated employees in the clerk's office, there are 11 of us, continued to work in the office, at the assembly meetings. The staff developed and created a new standard for virtual Teams meetings and Teams live meetings. This meeting where you can participate by phone, by Teams, by in person, and so can the public. This is just incredible. We've developed new ways for the public to participate in your regular meetings, including phone testimony and more. Plus, every single one of our staff members has continued to do his or her regular work, answering phone calls and emails, directing the public to resources, preparing materials, and working with other departments on the renewal of marijuana, liquor, and business licenses. We've updated the lobbyist registration form and produced lobbying reports. We've scheduled assembly committee meetings. We've published public notices. We've supported the Board of Adjustment in 4 appeals in the last 6 months. We prepare agendas and minutes and documents for the regular and special assembly meetings, and you've had a few extra meetings in 2020. In addition to doing the regular work of the clerk's office and the assembly, we even took on a few extra projects in 2020. The rollout of our new agenda and meeting manager system. It was a bit bumpy, but it's working now, and it's working better than the old system. We're working on an update of the City View system for liquor, marijuana, and business licensing. We've updated the sound system in the chambers. We have new speakers, new microphones, a new phone system. Again, a couple of bumps. We've worked with the Assembly Communications Subcommittee to update pages on the website. We've coordinated a new COVID-19 page. We've implemented the Assembly Navigators program with assistants at the chambers providing fabulous information about the Assembly called Assembly 101. And of course, you know there's more. So I'd like to finish with my 4th item. Usually, I celebrate this week with the clerk staff, the Ombudsman's Office, and Assembly Council with a pizza party, but we couldn't do that this year, and it seems a small price to pay when others have suffered so much more. The pizza party is to celebrate my anniversary with the municipality. Monday marked my 22nd anniversary of working with the MOA. Although it's been an incredibly difficult year for all of us. I could not ask to work with such an amazing group of people working every day to make Anchorage a better place. Thank you.
Yeah, that's John. Thank you, Barbara, and thank you to the small but mighty team that we have that does so much. Are there any questions for Barbara?
I'd say more, but I'm tearing up. It has been amazing, the progress we've made over the last year, and particularly in the ability for public to participate. And what's frustrating is we have so many new people who are engaged, at whatever level. Sometimes it's frustrating for us, but in the, starting at last summer, who don't realize that the phone testimony is brand new. It's a huge opportunity that didn't exist before. And the early audience participation just didn't exist. And those are obviously so popular. And we rolled those out this year, or we, the clerks did, thank you, in midst of COVID. it's made a huge difference in the amount of, I mean, you can see our meetings go to midnight because we have people testifying, and you know, it's harder on us, but it just should be that way. And yeah, so it is absolutely amazing. Assembly 101, the things we've done to move forward, the ability for citizens to participate is huge. And all the time I've been watching, so I'm thrilled with it. And so and you know, and like, I mean, Barbara had a long list, and we could add lots to it. So there has been huge progress last year. I'm just very excited about it. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Just want to note, for the record, we've been joined by Cameron Perez-Verdia, although he was with us since the beginning of the meeting, but now he's with us on the live. Welcome, Cameron. Suzanne?
Thanks, Felix. Congratulations to you, Barbara, on 22 years, and thank you so much for all that you do and all that your team does. The level of professionalism and work ethic is truly remarkable. So thank you so much for everything you do and the amazing progress that's been made under a most unusual and difficult year. Thank you. Thanks, Felix.
Thanks. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Barbara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things I also wanted to mention was in actually 2019, when Suzanne LaFrance was vice chair, she asked us to develop a flexible work policy. And in December of 2019, the Assembly leadership and the Clerk's office, along with Assembly Council and the Ombudsman, approved that policy at Suzanne's direction. And in 3 months, we are implementing it wholesale. And it's just been all of the work that we have done. Just there's something about how prescient that we are and forward-looking. It's just really amazing. And your support and your ideas have really driven that. So again, thank you all for that.
Thanks, Barbara. Forrest?
Thank you, Felix. I wanted to say congratulations to Barbara and her whole team, and thank you for the truly outstanding work you've done this past year. 2 things. One, I'll say that I sort of disagree with John on some of the reforms that we've made and whether they're working or not, but that is those were entirely policy calls made by the Assembly, not the, you know, we asked the Clerk's office to effectuate that, and they did it very well. But I think that maybe we made a couple of errors in the last year and a half or so. But that being said, we also passed some really, we were really on the ball when the pandemic started, and that is almost entirely due to Barbara and her leadership. I mean, I remember those meetings when we were still sort of laughing and joking about social distance, and Barbara took it seriously right from the beginning, before really anybody else I encountered in my life in the municipality. And so we were about a week or 2 weeks ahead of everybody else, and those weeks made a crucial difference because of how chaotic things got with the emergency orders and the real fear from the virus, and then when the deaths started, obviously. And so we were just really fortunate to have Barbara and her leadership at that really crucial moment in the history of the Assembly. And so I'm just really thankful for her leadership during that time and her continued leadership during this entire really challenging year. Thank you.
Thanks, Forrest. Chris?
Yeah, thank you. On a similar vein, the thing that many members of the public don't understand really well is that the clerk's office, the Assembly's team, is very bare bones. You know, when people think about government, they think about all the thousands of people that work for the municipality. And so it's easy to get kind of in your mind that it's just this giant lumbering thing that can do all the things that you want, all when you want them right now. And so hearing all of the work that was done and the small list of people who are doing it really, I hope, points to people who are listening that this work is done by people, a small crew of people who are really dedicated. And so it's not like in some ways you might conceive of where you have this big government working. It's literally just your neighbors. Just want to put that out there.
Thanks. Pete?
Well, thanks, Felix, and I want to also congratulate Miss Jones on her many years of service to the people of Anchorage, and all the good work that she does to help us and make us look good if that's possible. And the clerk's office, I've been on the assembly here going on 7 years now, and I've been amazed from the beginning the amount of work that gets done in the clerk's office. And when people ask me, about the city, who runs the city or whatever, I'm going, well, have you been to the clerk's office? Because that's, that's where it happens. And so congratulations to Barbara and her whole team. And so we just got to keep the team together and continue moving forward like we have been. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on next to assembly priorities. So there's two of the priority areas that I wanted to lift up and talk about today. First is communications. First specific and then a general discussion. So first, assembly member comments. So at the last meeting, members may have noticed me setting aside the last 10 minutes of the meeting for member comments and ending final participation to do so. I'm not sure 10 minutes was necessarily long enough, but I wanted to see if any members had feedback or thoughts on continuing the practice of blocking out a certain amount of time at the end of meetings for us to provide member comments. So are there any thoughts on that as a continuing practice?
Well,
I'd like to make a comment on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Cameron.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I'm still figuring this system out, so I'll learn how to put something in chat in a second. Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to say that I really appreciated that. I've communicated for other members' knowledge. I communicated with Felix a couple times over the last month or so, just sort of expressing that I think it's important that we have that time. When I first got on the assembly, I was there was times when I thought, oh, do we really need to say anything more? That that time sometimes just felt unnecessary. But boy, recently it's felt more necessary than ever because of the nature of our meetings and the amount of testimony that we're getting, and that there's not really a thoughtful time to sort of respond and react to some of the information that we're getting, and to share some important information with the public and to share information with our fellow colleagues. So I would just really say that I think it is an important thing to carve out. I would also say that during public testimony, we've talked a lot about how we don't want to get into a debate or have back and forth during that period of time. And it feels like that is a nice time to be able to sort of summarize some of the things that we've heard that are important to us in that meeting. So all that being said, I would really encourage us to prioritize having time at the end of the meeting and to allowing assembly members to make some substantive and thoughtful comments to close out meetings. I think it would really help overall. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Cameron. Suzanne?
Thanks, Felix. I appreciate Cameron's remarks. And my only, concern would be for the public to know and have that expectation that the last 10 minutes of the meeting are reserved for comments. Just because we've had so many people queued up to testify, I wouldn't want them to get all the way to the end and then not have time to testify. But I think it's a really good idea for all the reasons that Cameron mentioned. Thanks.
Thanks, Cameron. Yeah, that'll be part of my responsibility, is to make sure the public is informed if that's going to be happening. Okay, seeing no further discussion, then I'll move on. So just also wanted to
Mr.
open
Chair.
it up. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. I just would suggest that 55 seconds per member is probably not enough.
Yes, yeah, I would agree. As we saw at the last regular assembly meeting, I was not able to finish my comments, and then I know there were a couple of members who didn't speak, perhaps because they saw we were running out of time. So yeah, we'll definitely take that into consideration, and we might do 15 minutes. The one thing that's for me, I have to consider is the balance of making sure we have enough time for that final audience participation, and making sure we have enough time for the member comments. But yeah, I appreciate that.
Felix, can I make one more small comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. One of the things that I've noticed that you're doing, and it relates to this, that I really appreciate, is that you know, the consistent reminder of this is why we do what we do, right? And knowing that new people can come to the assembly meetings at any point and they don't know what we've done in the past. And so being able to say, you know, when you come up and testify, it's our practice to not ask you questions, not to ask you questions, not to get into a conversation with you and that sort of thing. And here's why. We do that because you have a small amount of time and we want to hear from you. And it's really important. And during our debate, that's when we will, you know, share thoughts about the things we've heard, that sort of thing. So to the degree, I know it's a lot, but to the degree that you can consistently share, this is why we're doing what we're doing, and this is the thinking behind it. And I think that relates to this as well, in that, you know, that throughout the meeting, we are debating issues specific and that sort of thing. The only real time at the meeting that we have the opportunity to sort of thoughtfully share information or generally react to the things that we're learning about what's going on in the public is this last part. So to the degree that you can come up with some language to explain that in a quick way, I think it would really go a long way to making it something that the public sees as really valuable, and not just sort of a steal away from their time, but something that they think is really important and valuable that they're hearing from us during that period of time in a general way.
Thanks, Cameron.
Mr. Chair.
I'm definitely, yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. And I wasn't quite done, but the last thing I would add to that is we added a whole section of initial public testimony, which gets used up every time to the minute that's available. And so in the balancing of the time towards the end, also recognize that there is time at the beginning now and time at the end. And so I agree with Mr. Presverdia, Cameron, that those minutes where we can exchange with each other freely and openly, not on a topic before us, is very valuable.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Cameron. I will take all of those suggestions and see what we can get done. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move us on to general topic of the communications priorities. So as folks may remember from the first quarterly comprehensive update for the communications priority, we've completed about half of our items, and then we have about another half that are in progress. So I just wanted to see if folks wanted to have any general discussion of some of those items, and I'll go ahead and pull those items up for folks who maybe don't remember what those are. So those items that are in progress include a hiring of a full-time public engagement officer or consultant for the assembly, utilizing the FCC email list for public communication and outreach, overhaul of the website, which I already talked about during the chair's report, an electronic method for providing public notice. So would any members like to discuss any of those particular items and any progress they'd like to see on them? Suzanne?
Thanks, Felix. Concerning the FCC outreach, I know we had talked at a previous meeting about the FCC sharing agendas, for example, and that's something that I was doing to council presidents, but, you know, have dropped the ball on that recently. Where is that at with the FCC sending out agendas to councils and other folks signed up? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So I don't think it's systemic within FCC for them to do that. I think councils at this point likely send out particular agenda items when they think it's of interest for their council, but the FCC is not sending out the agenda to their list. So that's something that I can have a conversation with the FCC about.
And then if I may follow up on, I think you referred to it as a constituent advocate, and there have been a couple different names for hiring someone who would basically provide legislative assistance. Is that correct? Is that the position we're talking about?
So the position that I mentioned earlier was the public engagement officer. And in short, that would be a communications position would be the bulk of their work.
Okay, I understand. I had received some requests from constituents about the possibility of hiring someone who would be a constituent advocate and provide any kind of like legal assistance on the interpretation of the charter, or, you know, on interpretation of code and any other issue.
Yeah, I would suggest that possibly Daryl Hess might fit that category, but that's, I think, probably something I would probably start by having a conversation with Daryl on that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, because I think that's a lot of what he does.
Thanks.
Cameron?
Yeah, thanks, Felix. Just a comment on this. I in reflecting back on the last year on the assembly, I see so many of the challenges that we faced and so many of the missteps that have happened, and I really attribute a lot of it towards communication and really some things we could have done better and should do better related to communication, specifically communication with the public. And so I'm glad that we're making these steps forward, and we're making this a priority. That makes me very happy. I've seen some things that have happened. I mean, just some of the radio ads related to COVID-19 and CARES Act funding and that sort of thing. Just general sort of informative and positive communication out. So I would just say that I really want to continue to make this a priority for us, and it's worth investing in. So that, and then the last thing is just that one of the things that's been really clear is that we have systems in place, whether it's community councils or it's the different processes that we have in terms of notifying to the public about construction or these kinds of things that have been in place for a long time. And I often hear us saying, well, that's what we do. But it doesn't necessarily work, right? It doesn't necessarily get the information out to the public in a way that is most effective. So I just want to continue to encourage us to continue to get better and better at this. And I'm happy that we're investing in it, and I would be certainly in favor of continuing to invest resources into improving our ability to communicate with the public in general. So just a comment. Thanks.
Thanks, Cameron. And yeah, and I want to continue encouraging members, if they have any ideas, to please send those on to Assembly Leadership and the Communications Subcommittee. A lot of the improvements that we have been making are because a member has a random idea and we implement that through our processes. So yeah, definitely encourage folks to share your ideas. Okay, not seeing anything else, then we will keep coming back to this priority and see what we can get done. So next is homelessness. Wanted to lift that priority up, and just wanted to have a discussion very similar to what the now named Housing and Homelessness Committee had. So I wanted to have a discussion about changing the name of this priority to match the intent of the name change of the now Housing and Homelessness Committee. Sort of as an FYI, members might recall that the quality of life priority does mention, quote, housing options and variety, end quote, as a long-term goal. And one of the long-term goals in the now homelessness priority also mentions housing as well, quote, filling housing gaps, end quote. So are there any thoughts on making a change to this priority so it matches the intent of what happened in the committee, or are we fine with leaving this priority as named?
So Felix, I think it's fine to rename that. Oh, can you guys hear me okay? Barbara said this headset's not working well.
Barbara says it's much better.
Okay, yeah, it's a new headset. I'm not used to where to speak, I guess. So you know, it's fine. I think homelessness is so closely tied to housing, but it would just be alert to you know, crossover with the Community and Economic Development Committee. We look at Title 21 stuff, which is largely how do you make housing cheaper? Are there tweaks we can make, or you know, and not, you know, not that there can't be overlap, but just be alert to where the two committees. I don't want two committees looking at the same thing often. It just can confuse things. So I just something to watch for.
Yeah, thanks, John. Currently, there is already a little bit of an overlap on housing. It's already, like I stated, included in two different priorities, quality of life and the current homelessness priority. So it's definitely something that crosses over a lot. Any other comments on this? If there's not a strong will to change, I'm not gonna make the push myself. So unless there's any other comments, then we will just leave it as the homelessness priority.
Mr. Chair, you know, I may have a bias. I think about housing a lot and housing policy, and so I personally believe that it is helpful to broaden that conversation myself. And so I think it would be wise to unify our message across all the platforms, but I won't either push really hard because I recognize that I spend a lot of time thinking about housing and homelessness, so, and they are often connected.
Thanks. Forrest?
Thanks, Felix. I was just trying to remember if Meg was with us today, because I think she spearheaded this effort at the Housing and Homeless Committee, and I can't remember if she was one of the people you had mentioned is excused today.
She is excused today, yes. Otherwise, I'm sure she would have more to say.
Right. So I guess what I would just say is let's not make a decision on this without her here, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think I would also add, because we adopted these priorities in a formal resolution, I don't think we could just willy-nilly change the priorities. I think we would probably have to come back with another resolution that would change the name formally. So I'm fine with us having this conversation next month when hopefully Meg will be able to join us.
That would be my preference. Thank you.
All right. With that, I guess I'll go ahead and introduce these topics since we did the same thing for communications. I want to talk a little bit about some of the long and short-term priorities in homelessness. Again, Meg isn't here, but Chris and others who have worked on this a long time are. So for the homelessness priorities, as folks may remember, in the quarterly comprehensive newsletter, most of them are in progress. I think there are two of them that I wanted to lift up, see if any folks had any thoughts on them. First is around data strategies. I think that was the only one where we hadn't really started that work yet, although I understand some of our partners are engaging in that. And then second is crafting policy to assist in filling housing gaps. So those were the two areas that I just wanted to lift up, see if folks had any discussions on that. But otherwise, I'm sure we can come back to that and have a discussion when Meg is able to join us.
Felix, what was the first one you said?
Say that again, Cameron. I didn't hear you.
What was the first one? I got the second one. I didn't get the first one you said.
Yeah, so the short version is data strategies, but let me just pull it up so I can read the longer version of it. So engage in a holistic approach with all anchored home partners in regard to data strategies.
Yeah. Well, I'll share a few thoughts on that. So Chris, Meg, and I consistently are in a meeting with other homeless partners early in the morning on, I don't know what day it is, and this sort of the data piece has been, I guess I'd link it both with the data piece with also the communication piece around homelessness. And I'm happy to hear that I continue to hear that we're getting some of the things out, but one of the things that came up in that meeting recently that I wanted to share and that relates to this is sort of the homeless prevention work that is going on and how we frame that. So framing a lot of the work that we're doing around housing and around stabilization is actually preventing people from becoming homeless. But just it's been striking to me that at every community council meeting I have, there are questions around homelessness, and that it's been very difficult to have just a very simple report with data and with clear metrics on where we're at and what progress has been made, and that sort of thing. The conversation around data and around communication continues there. So yeah, I'm remaining patient as we work our way through this, but I will just say that that from my perspective, there continues to be a difficult sort of the lack of sort of a good system in place to be able to produce a very clear, publicly accessible, easily understandable report with information on it that says, here's where we're at. Here's how many people are homeless. Here's how many people went into housing this month. Here's how many people are at these shelters. Here's where we're at, or here's the key things that have been done over the last month. So I would want to continue to push for that and make that a priority. And I realize there's a lot of layers to that, and there's a lot of reasons why that's challenging. But we're not there yet by any means, and it continues to be a point of concern from my community councils that they don't have sort of a easily accessible, good information about where things are at. And what that does is it continues to perpetuate a negative narrative that we're not making progress, and that it's getting worse, and all of that. So anyway, all that being said, I think that this needs to continue to be a priority in terms of getting good data, putting it in a form that's really easily understood and accessible, and creating a format for us and others to get it out to the public frequently. That's it.
Yeah, thanks, Cameron. So some of the work that Meg, Chris, and I have been engaging with Northwest Strategies is very much around the topic that you are bringing up. So Northwest Strategies is continuing to develop a communications plan, which I hope we'll be able to share soon. And a big part of the request that particularly Meg had asked of Northwest Strategies is that we be able to systematically produce reports that we can share with our community councils on a regular basis, so that we can share the latest and greatest on what's going on surrounding homelessness and housing and all of those other areas combined. So yeah, I hear you that it is a priority, and hopefully the product that Northwest Strategies comes up with will be able to at least move us along in that priority area.
Felix, can I ask Cameron a question?
Yeah, sure.
So Cameron, is the data not available or are they collecting the information and just not able to put it in a report that works? What's the holdup?
Again, I am being patient about this. I don't know. I mean, I've been hearing about Northwest Strategies. We can ask Felix because he's involved in those meetings. I've been hearing about that for, it feels like, quite some time. And we're meeting with the coalition and with the United Way and with all these other folks, and all of them are talking about Rasmussen, and all they're talking about communication and having communication meetings and trying to figure out a better communication plan. And that's been the same conversation for the couple of years I've been on the assembly, and I still don't think we have I don't. The dashboards and the things that are out there are super difficult to access and to understand, and so I don't know the reasons behind it, with the exception of there are still a lot of infrastructure problems, I understand, in terms of collecting the information. There are a lot of agencies and organizations and efforts going on that aren't necessarily linked, and they're not necessarily always using the same data. And so there's a lot of interest and energy around doing better around this, but I haven't necessarily seen at this point, for instance, the coalition has their website and they produce reports occasionally, but those reports, from my perspective, can be difficult to understand, and they need a fair amount of explanation. So yeah, I guess what I'm really coming to is that I go to all the different websites and go to a lot of the different meetings, but I have yet to sort of get a sense of a comprehensive communication plan across agencies, and sort of an ability to put that information into a format that's consistent and that's easily understood. And so it sounds like that's what the Northwest Strategy effort's about. And I know that also the HLC is working on communications as well. And so, and I also just would preface all of that by saying COVID threw this all in a loop, right? Is that prior to COVID, there was a lot of conversations about communication and about improving communication around homelessness in Anchorage, and the collaboration that's happening between the agencies. And when COVID hit, that became less of a priority because everyone was reacting to what was going on. And so I certainly, that's a big part of it as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, not seeing anyone else in the queue, we're going to go ahead and move on. Thanks, John. Thanks, Cameron. Okay, so that completes our discussion of Assembly priorities. Next, we have Assembly member discussion on pending business and update from committee's upcoming business. So I'm just going to go down on the presentation list, and if you have any update on committee work or any update on your own individual Assembly member work, this would be the time to do that. So I will start with Jamie.
Thank you, Felix. I don't have anything to report. I'm not a chair of anything. So thank you, though.
Thank you. Chris.
Yeah, so I mentioned it the other night that working on a project to ensure the long-term ability for restaurants and bars to have outdoor service. The Assembly did manage to cure the problem for the midterm by the policy change that was made that attached the outdoor service special permit to the AMCO policy, but there's still the tactical issue of the long-term resolution, which is to get a regulatory and a law change that will allow us to make it permanent and then streamline the municipal process. But that kind of becomes less of a critical need at this time because the policy that was implemented on Tuesday was kind of fixed. And so otherwise, I don't have a long slate. I'm kind of monitoring closely the elections, kind of take some tour down to the election center, make sure that everything is on the up and up. And otherwise, that's kind of where I am right now.
Thanks, Chris. Forrest.
Thank you, Felix. I turned on my camera Desiree's urging, but no, I don't have any additional projects at this time. Thanks.
Thanks. Cameron?
Let's see. Yeah. So you prompted this. I don't know if it's going to come up later. Do you want me to talk a little bit about naming stuff, or is that a different item? Naming panel.
It's later on in the panel, in the agenda, if you want to save it for that.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Okay. And so beyond that, lots of things happening, in my district. So lots of specific things. But in terms of committees, the Public Safety Committee is meeting soon and continuing to look at both providing consistent updates and information to the assembly and the public. The body camera work has been shifted over, and Crystal's on. What's the other group? The Public Commission. Help me out. What's the other group that is taking on?
Public Safety Advisory Commission.
Advisory Commission. Thank you. One of the things that is sort of is emerging and I'm really curious about is sort of the role the Assembly is going to play and the Public Safety Committee in the hiring process for a new police chief. And so there's been some interest from the public around that, and so that's something that's sort of on my mind and coming down the pipe. I think that's it in terms of, for me, for committees. We continue to have this long to-do list that we on the Public Safety Committee have been updating and putting on our website as a way to really think about what are the priorities for the committee over the next year, what are the thoughts and concerns we're hearing from the public, and sort of keeping track of those and monitoring those. So I would just encourage members to keep your eye on that, because we're continuing to update that big long to-do list of things that we're working on. So that's probably it for now. And we're going to talk about the native village of Eklutna stuff. It looks like later, so I'll save on that too.
Great, thanks, Cameron. Pete.
I think Suzanne's got a question for Cameron, actually.
Sure. Suzanne?
Thanks, Felix. Thanks, Pete. Yes, Cameron, did you mention the West Anchorage representative issue? I know you were working with legal on pursuing a temporary appointment of an assembly rep for your area.
Yeah, there's a number of sort of district specific projects that are going on right now that I'm fairly engaged with, and that's one of them. Following the postponement of both the ordinance and the resolution that were brought forward by me, member Allard and Kennedy, I had conversations with all three of my community councils around that, and certainly there's still a great deal of interest in trying to find a path forward, both a temporary solution and also some real sort of thoughtful work about changing our code or potentially even changing charter, so to avoid this in the future. But I have continued. I'm actually planning on going back and having a conversation with Dean, member Kennedy, and I had a conversation about this, and so work continues on that. But to be honest, at this point, there's not a clear path forward in terms of a temporary solution for filling that seat. And then I know that that Chris, and I've asked to join the work that he's doing. He's looking at some potential code changes around special elections that may or may not relate to this, but that's really where it's at. I think there's a sense of both: can we find a temporary solution to fill this seat, and then also can we look at some of the existing policy and make some changes so we don't find ourselves in this place again in the future. But I would just say honestly that that based on the work that member Allard Kennedy and I did around finding a temporary solution, there is nothing has emerged at this point as a thoughtful way to temporarily fill that seat without it being fairly problematic.
Thank you, Cameron. Appreciate your work on that and the update. Thanks, Felix.
Thanks. Pete?
Thanks, Felix. Typically this time of year, we would be having the Alaska Municipal League convention down in Juneau. We have that convention with the legislature session down there, and usually the middle of or the second half of February. So this year that convention was virtual, and we actually had a couple of virtual meetings last year or last week, including a board meeting and also a meeting with Senator Murkowski, a Zoom meeting, and which actually we did that last Friday and ended up lasting long enough that I ended up missing our meeting, a recap of the equity discussion. Anyway, Senator Murkowski was giving us updates on legislation that she's involved in, dealing with energy and also the response to the pandemic. I'm also part of a group, state and local leaders, that's putting together a list of projects that we're hoping to be included in the Biden administration's Build Back Better infrastructure bill that they're in the process of putting together back east right now. And our top priority here in Anchorage the last few years has been getting funding for the Port of Anchorage. And so I'm working with the administration to come up with the most recent estimate of what the cost of rebuilding our port is, and then going to include that on the list of projects that the Biden administration hopefully will get funded. And that's where I'm at right now.
Oh, they don't need to read anything. I'm just, those are parents that you got.
Yeah, do you mind if I read it real quick? Keep it on here.
Whoops, if we can make sure, folks, if you're not speaking, if you're on mute, please. Thanks so much, Pete. Appreciate that. And I'm sure you meant to say the Port of Alaska.
Did I say Port of Anchorage? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I actually had written down Port of Alaska, but it's a hard habit to break. Anyway, thanks.
Understood. Thanks. John?
Well, thanks. You know, Community and Economic Development Committee, we are, I've been working for a long time on the changes to the marijuana code in Title 21 and the licensing, but we are making pretty good progress. And it's on our agenda for next week for the CEDC, and we could be very close to being done with a draft change. I think the trickiest part will be the look at different, you know, protected uses and how we might deal with that. So, and then AMCO, we've taken long enough that AMCO has had changes consistently during that time that might need to be kind of put in there, but we do have some progress on that, so I'm pretty happy with that. We had one meeting, we looked at how the city handles rights of way and easements that have been not asserted over time, and we should have another one soon. I want to finish the marijuana stuff because we're so close to that before we dive back into that. And that next step we'll be hearing from the administration, public works and so on, the right of way people, you know, what are their current routines and how are they working. And then the shelter licensing, we're working fairly briskly, and I have to say it was Meg and Chris Constant were more the driving force there. I'm not sure it has gone to the providers yet, though, and it's a little bit tough because the Planning and Zoning Commission will see the code change to potentially allow shelters in B1 district, B3 districts, and we had hoped to have that concurrent with that so people could see that's not a solitary effort. So, but I think we're going to be a little bit behind on that, but that's still being in the works. There's also, and this is Forest has nothing in the works. Forest has something in the works. From about a year ago, we had gotten a couple things going with the home builders requests, and there were a couple of them that we did pass last year. Yeah, but there are a couple that were related to Title 21 that we thought were heading towards the Planning Commission, but it turns out they weren't. So the administration said they would try to work things out with the builders, and that has not happened. So we may be bringing a few things that we'll introduce at the Assembly with the intent that then they would go through the Planning and Zoning Commission process and come back to us. And that can take, go through that process a number of months. So my guess would be July, August before we saw them coming. And AMATs, an interesting comment yesterday at our policy committee meeting is apparently there's $11.24 million coming from the most recent act from Congress. And I don't really track that well. I don't know if someone here is, but that is apparently, road funds that can't be used on local roads, but other than that is very broadly available for repairs and operation costs or building new stuff, whatever it might be. So that's an interesting opportunity because there are with federal AMATs funds so many restrictions. There's little cracks that we can't quite fill with it, and that's compare we get 29-30 million a year through AMATs. So this is really quite a lot to have a look at. So. People might be thinking of what could that be used for, and it's got to be things in our TIP or in our MTP, but we can modify those too. So anyway, those are highlights. Thanks.
Great, thanks, John. Suzanne?
Thanks, Felix. So starting with committee priorities, we do have a Health Policy Committee meeting next week, and I think probably as part of the Health Department update, there'll be some conversation regarding the health emergency and when it's over and continuing interpretation of data and metrics. And then just following along with that, we had the last 3 EOs to AOs on Tuesday, and I hope to work more with John and Meg to take a close look to see if there's anything else that can fit into this approach. I do have a question about Q1 budget revisions concerning the body cameras. I guess just to flag, if in the event that the levy for APD equipment does not pass, then we will need to figure out a way to fund those cameras in first quarter budget revisions. I just wanted to flag that. And then I also have a follow-up item concerning animal code that is unrelated to the 2 other items coming forward concerning animal code. And this is a piece that we had pulled off from some work in 2019 concerning due diligence with animals that are impounded. And so I'll get with legal and pick up where we left off on that. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. And then for me, other than fulfilling responsibilities as chair, I don't really have anything else to add at this time in terms of individual work. So we're going to go ahead and move on to other items. We have a few.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah. Chris?
Just briefly before we move on, I'm opening an email real quick that I sent yesterday. John reminded me, I had been reached out to by NLC yesterday for my work on the Transportation Infrastructure Services Committee. And what they specifically asked for was kind of what they called a fire drill list of potential projects that would run through the MPO, your Metropolitan Planning Organization, or AMATs, in terms of high priority projects that are kind of would be considered by them that could be funded through the rescue plan. And they're like, we need it now. So I got a list from Craig, and I wanted to share with you all what I included on that list. One was one that's important to me, the first phase of the Seward to Glen Highway connection. One is the Spenard Road rehab One is the Fireweed Lane rehab, and one is the Campbell Creek Trail overpass over Lake Otis. And so I figured I better tell folks, I shared with the administration the email that I sent forward. I got those projects from our AMAT staff, and it doesn't mean anything's going to happen with it, but it very well could end up in a pre-section of the bill before it moves forward. So I just got a request for a Hail Mary, and I threw a Hail Mary.
Thanks, Chris.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So that's useful. There's, I guess it's just brainstorming and it popped into my head, but there is it's outside of AMATs, but the big state Windy Corner project on the Seward Highway south of town is a missing trail connection, and so it's really a great opportunity for that long trail vision, but it wasn't in their initial plan, wasn't in their NEPA, so they say, no, we can't put this trail connection in there, however it might be. I mean, I don't really want it next to the highway, maybe on the ridge above it or something, but wherever we go, we have this missing link, huge amount of work, equipment's going to be there. Can we do it? Is that something that, watch for opportunities for that, I guess would be my comment.
Thanks, John.
John, what I would ask for, if Mr. Chair, if I might, is just send me a paragraph, and maybe also include Craig, just because I'm trying to include the administration, or at least Jason. And I did include the port as well, but I didn't include a number with the port because it's not under the MPO. Every chance I get, I reinforce with every group that interfaces federally with the fact that we have a port issue. So port was number one, but it needs very big investment. Anyhow, so yes, I would be glad to include that in any conversations going forward. And the sooner you get it to me, the better, because they told me I have until today to get projects listed. And so I got those in yesterday, and I could add your concern.
Yeah, today comes up quick.
I know. I literally got it yesterday morning, and that's why they called it a fire drill. It's like, get us what you have right now because it's happening. And no promises, but. So I didn't want to miss the opportunity.
Great. Thanks, John. Thanks, Chris. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to our other items, and then probably save our last 5 to 10 minutes for audience participation. At this point, I'm okay if we want to open up the Q&A. Desiree, thanks. Okay, so first one is COVID-19. So just like has been done in prior meetings, I wanted to create space to have an open discussion about any issues which have come up regarding COVID-19 that folks with the Assembly to engage in either through committee process, work sessions, special committee meetings, or other forums. So I have one item to kick this off, and then we can open it up. And really, it's just my one item is a broad request of utilizing our current infrastructure, whether that's work sessions, committee meetings, or special committee meetings. I want to see if we can keep using work sessions to inform us of important work going on, which may take much longer than the time that we have at one of our regular Assembly meetings. Two topics come to mind that have come up recently. One, the roadmap to reopening, which the administration came up with, and we haven't really critically reviewed on our end. That has come up at several regular Assembly meetings, but we don't ever really engage in that work. And two, a review with AHD, the health department, of the school CDC guidance, if that is what the administration is going to be using to inform their decisions regarding school capacity or other school safety measures. And then I guess a third one would have been great to do before the meeting, but surrounding hockey and some of the issues there, I think it would have been great to hear from Dr. Hennessy and in a more robust manner during a work session versus during the regular Assembly meeting. So we've tried to bring up both of these items at regular Assembly meetings, but for the same reason that back and forth between members and the public doesn't work at a regular meeting, doing an in-depth discussion on these topics at regular meetings does not work. So I want to invite members to approach Assembly leadership with work session ideas or committee leadership with committee topics so that we can continue effectively doing our work and getting the answers that we need to do so. So any thoughts on this before we move on? Let's see if anyone else has any other items they want to bring up.
Suzanne had mentioned that the Health Policy Committee is looking at kind of when is it over, and so that really kind of ties into that roadmap to reopening. Suzanne, was that your intent to look at it at kind of that broad level, where we are and where we should be?
Thanks, John. Yes, that's my intent. We don't have it officially on the Health Policy Committee agenda, but given Tuesday's discussion and some of the community council discussions and the questions you've raised, John, I had thought that we would have a general discussion at the Health Policy Committee next week on that topic.
Good. And if I could continue?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Looking at the code that we wrote last year for what is a health emergency, obviously needs work. We know so much more now. And, I look at our definition of health emergency and I really don't think we meet it now. And that's a problem. I mean, it's a good thing, but it's also the definition is lacking. And then, of course, we don't have that critical piece of when is it over, at least something in there to say, if we do an emergency proclamation for a health emergency, that needs to include some kind of direction on when are we done, something like that. So that's some point in our future, we will need to revisit that, when we have maybe in 3 or 4 months when we have a little more distance from this, but not so long that we forget. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Chris?
Yeah, thank you. So interesting, this concept of the roadmap. We heard about it, and I actually never really thought about it again once after we heard about it. And then I went looking for it and couldn't find it. And so I think a briefing from the administration, I think maybe more substantial than the Health Policy Committee, or if it weren't the whole Health Policy Committee for a meeting, would be worthy. Because now I go to the page and it's just a 404 error, it does not exist. And basically, we've all probably been operating under our own sensibilities and the data that we keep hearing and of acknowledging that we're getting closer to opening. It looks like things are in the right order, the right track. And so, but it would be very helpful to have a briefing and maybe a redeployment and a kind of updated version and maybe a whole campaign around this is what the roadmap is and this is how close we are. Anyhow, I think it's wise.
Thanks, Chris. Suzanne?
Thanks, Felix. I was going to make a similar comment as what Chris said concerning the roadmap to reopening. I could not find it easily. I'm not sure if I did find it. And I think that it would be helpful to have a work session where the administration walks us through it and presents it, because you're right, Tuesday isn't enough time to address it. The second part under the COVID-19 issues has to do with an economic recovery plan, and if that's something that's being worked in the CEDC, or if other members have interest in one from the Assembly specifically, or if it folds into our larger priorities of our economic goals. And so I guess I'm just putting that out there to see if I missed something, if it's already being worked, or if there's interest in handling it separately. Thanks.
Thanks, Suzanne. Pete?
Well, thanks, Felix. And my subject dealing with the COVID-19 situation is that we have to encourage everyone to sign up to get vaccinated. The fastest and best way out of this thing is through vaccinations, in my opinion. And we're already leading the nation, and there's no reason why we shouldn't.
The bioterrorist weapon from communist China.
My apologies for that, Mr. Peterson. If we can go ahead and deal with that on a staff end, please. Thank you. Please continue.
Well, anyway, you know, we are getting 103,000 doses next month, and that doesn't include any from Johnson & Johnson if their vaccine is approved. So we're headed in the right direction, and we just need to encourage everyone we know that's in the groups that qualify to sign up and get vaccinated. Thank you.
Thanks. Cameron?
Thanks, and I apologize. I had to step away for a few minutes, so if this is a repeat or, but just a couple of thoughts. One is that I've really appreciated the mayor's updates that are happening weekly and around COVID and I've been forwarding those every week to my community councils, and they've been distributing those out to the members. And so that's been really helpful. I did find that a lot of the COVID information, whether it's the dashboards or the information on the website, you know, I would go there every time I'd go to a meeting. I'd go and I'd look at that. It was really difficult to understand when it was updated, what the most recent numbers are. So I've been really appreciating this weekly sort of look at it. The challenge with the weekly thing, though, is that it only touches on certain things. Like, it doesn't have, you know, all of the different programs, or it sort of selects particular information to give updates on. And so so I am also I'm actually going to try to schedule a meeting with some of the folks in the administration to talk about this next week. But you know, again, I think the mayor had made this comment at the last meeting that there is a plan, there is a roadmap, there is a that sort of thing. And I think that is true, but there needs to be more conversation with us around you know, what that specifically looks like, what the metrics are, you know, knowing that it's not, you know, there are some qualitative pieces of that need to be, it's not all just, you know, a hard number, that there's some other factors that need to be involved. But I would just say that generally, I think the administration has done a good job of trying to think strategically about how to get information out. But I would also appreciate a session with them specifically on this roadmap and on the sort of metrics that they're using, and make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of how we're looking at that. And just the last thing is, I do think that whatever documents that they put on the website, that those are easily accessible, but also that there is an update date on there. Like, this was updated as of X. And I think in some cases that's on there, and other cases it's not. So that's just some feedback that I think would be helpful for us. Thanks.
Thanks, Cameron. Any other discussion on COVID-19? Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on then. Next topic is federal stimulus. So as most know, Congress is currently going through the process of hopefully approving another COVID-19 stimulus package. The current version of this package has dollars for local and state governments, similar to the package that was done last year, but with a smaller dollar amount. I've begun talking with the administration about the process we might take to deliberate the usage of these dollars. I hope to be able to present a draft, for lack of a better term, public outreach plan to this body in the coming weeks. So when the stimulus is approved and signed by the president, and assuming it maintains those dollars for local and state governments, that we're ready to get to work. So any thoughts or requests on this topic? Otherwise, you'll likely see a special rules committee meeting in the coming weeks with a plan outlined for how we're going to get this work done. Forrest?
Thank you, Felix. And I realize this might be a point of contention, but for me, thinking about the next round of federal stimulus and that which is directly under the control of the municipality, we went through a very thorough, very long process this summer where we called in a ton of stakeholders and we had some really good discussions. But it really delayed some of our funding getting onto the street. And ultimately, because some things were rolled out before some other things, there were some very significant misconceptions about what we actually ended up funding. But my preference would be in this round that we try to use existing programs and we try to get the funding basically on the street as soon as possible. So for me, that means small business grants, it means rental relief, and it means the daycare program. If the daycare, I know there were some issues about maybe it actually had too much money in that program, but if there is an additional need in the child care program. So my preference would be fewer meetings, fewer sort of hearings, and trying to get the money out as quickly as possible into existing programs that have, if we're allowed to use the same, I know in some cases the federal rules have changed so you can't use the same applications, but I would try to use the same applications if at all possible. That's my preference.
Thanks. Chris?
Yeah, I don't want to be too contrary to that. I think that yes to that in part, but also we should look very closely at areas we missed, areas of new need, and we should be careful to ensure that we're swift, but also have strong input. And so it might argue that rather than wait for the bill to pass, we do some kind of processes in advance where we have some public discussion about what's worked and what hasn't worked. I mean, certainly we've heard, and we can start to hone in on those kind of things before the bill is signed, even though you don't want to count your chickens before they hatch, so that when the time comes, we are prepared as opposed to having to wait a month to 6 weeks to get it rolling. I tend to agree with Forrest that there are some processes that were so slow to build that we should definitely continue using them because they're built. And we don't want to have to recreate any of that stuff to slow it down. But we should be mindful of other areas that need to be kept or protected.
Thanks, Chris. Any other discussion on that before we move on? Okay, so next topic to discuss is the Native Village of Eklutna MOA meeting agenda. So I wanted to make space at this meeting to see if members had any agenda topics that they'd like to include for our first or subsequent formal government-to-government meeting with Eklutna. We don't have a date set just yet, but the first meeting will likely take place in late April. Meg and I have one topic to get started, and then I'd like to hear what other members might have. So some may have seen on social media when it made the rounds a few weeks ago, the village of Teslin has begun making road signs in both English and Tlingit. Meg and I wanted to have a discussion with Eklutna to gauge interest in doing something similar in the municipality. Okay, so other items members would like to discuss at a future government-to-government meeting with Eklutna. What do y'all have?
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'll go. The first thing that I want us to do with them is not topical, but rather procedural. And that's in a meeting together to discuss how we want to work together in the context of our meetings. And so a good measure of that first meeting should be diplomatic, really, in its nature of kind of establishing the formalities of the process that we've now encoded. So that's an important piece.
Mr. Chair, I was in the queue here.
Yeah, go ahead, Forrest.
So I want to echo what Chris just said, but also say that, you know, we need to find a way beforehand, and perhaps you are reaching out on this, but as we do with the school board, giving the, you know, making sure that the Native Village of Eklutna, whether the president or the tribal council, has the option to, the ability to put things on that agenda. And we've got to make sure we've got a good process for that. two other things that I think are worth starting conversations about. One is again the naming conventions that that I know Mr. Perez-Verdia brought up on Tuesday night, and perhaps changes to the naming ordinance, because our naming ordinance kind of doesn't function very well right now, because there's no way to affirmatively go out, and there's no trigger the way there is, like, for example, when someone in the community passes away. Right now, there's really no trigger to go out and affirmatively name or rename things their indigenous name. And I think that's what we're talking about. And related, and this might be on the forefront of people's minds come April. It might be a later date, but I know that there is discussion happening now at the state level and in some other corners about renaming the Glen Highway. And I want to make sure that we hear from Eklutna their thoughts on that, if that were to happen. And if they have any suggestions about what a name would be. And of course, it's a state facility, and using federal funds. We as Anchorage don't have any direct control over it, but presumably we would want to take a position, or perhaps not. But it's something I'd like to talk to Eklutna about.
Could chime in for us. We heard yesterday it would cost about $2 million to change the signs on the Glen Highway, and DOT couldn't use federal funds to do that, so they're not happy about that idea. There was a comment that it might be easier for Don Young to change his name to Glenn.
Well, I would say that, well, we don't got to get into this, but I'd be curious to hear if the Eklutna, Naya Village or Eklutna had thoughts on what might be a more appropriate name.
Could I add briefly that they didn't say $2 million. They said $2 million for the entire state except the signs in Anchorage and Fairbanks. And so, or wait, not Anchorage and Glen Allen, or wherever. They said we would have to change our own signs if they changed it. So it isn't just 2 million, it's 2 million plus Anchorage would have to pony up for all of our signs.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, John. Any other comments on this topic? Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on then. So next is naming panels, and hopefully, Cameron, you're still with us. So as it was brought up at the last regular meeting just a few days ago, I wanted to see if there was an update on the naming panel project, which has been discussed in this committee in previous months. From what I could recall, Mr. Cameron and a couple other members were going to consider a public process to rethink our naming process that we currently have in code. So Cameron, if you're still here, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, I'm still here. There'll be a little bit of background noise, but it's just my family. No update. But I would say that it's a priority of mine, and I don't think I remember clearly who the other people who want to be involved, but I'll just share that, initially I reached out to Daryl Hess. He provided some really wonderful information for me about background and history around naming in the municipality. So I have all of that, and I reviewed it. And just because of, life and work and pandemic and everything else, it really got put on hold. But I am sort of reinvigorated around it, and am really looking forward to beginning that process again. So I'm planning to reach back out to Mr. Hess and asking him to join that work. He initially agreed to that and was excited to work on it. And so, and I believe Miss Kennedy was one of the people who was interested. So if she's still interested, that'd be great. And if there is another member who would like to join that work, I'd be happy to start that up again, and next week send an email to Mr. Hess and begin working on that. So essentially, there's no progress that's been made, but I will sort of commit to moving this forward from this conversation.
Could I chime in?
Yeah. Who was that?
John.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so Cameron, I was thinking about this after the discussion of the, Girdwood ball fields and this idea, well, how do you say, okay, here's an issue, someone wants to name this ball field after someone like that. Now, how do you go and say, is there an alternative name, indigenous name? And that's a kind of it makes an odd kind of situation. But, it seems like if there were a list that said, should an opportunity come up, these are some, native leaders or something, that we would like to commemorate somehow. So you could look at that list and go, hey, this is an opportunity to do that. Or, excuse me, or a site name. These are indigenous names for these locations. So if we do, new signs for the trail or something, we'll include those. Just so, you have a list to refer to instead of starting anew every time there's some proposal to rename something.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, can I respond to John?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think without going too much in depth, and I'd be happy to sit down and have a longer conversation with you about this. I think there's a few key pieces to it. I think there's a big picture piece in that, what is the, this municipality and who are we and what is our history and what, 100 years from now, how do we want sort of people who visit this place and what is the story we want to tell about who we are and where we've come from and what we've accomplished, and how is that represented in how we name the land and the buildings and the things that we have. So I think because it feels to me at times that is a little bit of a piecemeal approach, that there's not a thought to that, And the second thing is that we've created a bit of a culture of trying to use buildings and land and landmarks and things like that as a way of sort of establishing legacy for people that we care about. And I guess I would just not say that that's wrong, but I would question that. Is that the right approach? Is my sister 10 years ago died, and we had the opportunity to put her name on a road. Is that, I'm not sure about that in terms of that being what we want, in terms of how our city is represented. Another level is access, is that the access to naming and to the process and to naming panels, that sort of thing, is very much restricted to those who are aware of it, those who have time and access and resources. So it disproportionately favors people who know that system and can work through it. And so predominantly most of the buildings are named after people who are either in power or people who have a lot of sort of access and ability and those kinds of things. And so I think that there's an equity issue there. And then finally, I think that there's, as I mentioned, there's a piece of us beginning to repair what's been done, right? And the colonization of this area and the erasure of indigenous people in this area is prominent. And so I think there could be a thoughtful, long-standing process of beginning to bring that back. And so all that being said, I like the idea of having thoughtful conversations with the local tribes about what is the original name of this area and what are some leaders you want to make sure that are being sort of thought through. And so for me, it's more of a process of looking at the processes that we use and thinking about, making sure they're equitable, making sure that they align to the vision of this city and its legacy and its history, and making sure that that we are just being really thoughtful about it. And I say all that, as I said in the meeting, not to say that people who are being chosen, that there's nothing wrong with that at all. I think that in terms of them being valuable people or important people, but that's what I think we get caught up in at times, is that the naming panel has gone through and we're questioning it at the end of it. And so then it gets like proposed of, well, do you not think this person's a very good person, or do you don't think that they deserve this? And it's not about that at all. It's more of I think that the process that was established is perpetuating a system that is that things are being named after people, and I just want to make sure that we're taking a step back and thinking about whether that's the right system and the right process for what we want ultimately for a city. So that's the best answer that I have, and I'm really looking forward to having that conversation and having lots of folks involved in it, so that it's representative of different groups and different perspectives. So hopefully that answered your question.
That's a great answer. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Chris?
Thank you. And I would come at those similar questions from the other side and say that I do actually believe there's a long American history and colonial, if you will, history, all around the world history of recognizing individuals who've made impacts in certain areas and who left a mark on people's hearts. And I want to make sure that whatever process we come up with still maintains that and does it in a way that respects and brings into the conversation other equities and individuals and groups, and in particular the native village of Eklutna, or as we heard in there's the Chugach, Alaska, I think is in Girdwood area. And so I want to make sure we still have room for the process of allowing people to raise up the members of their community who have done great by them. And in my experience, although it might seem like everything is named after, a privileged class of people because of the past, at least in the past 10 years to 15 years, I would say way more of them are coming from communities that would surprise you in the context of who's driving and who's being named. And so although some of those processes haven't actually landed in the commitments that were made being finished because of other political considerations, I would just be a voice not on the other side of that, but for ensuring that in some ways we still have the opportunity for people to honor those who've made an impact in our community. I very welcome this conversation.
Thanks, Chris. Forrest?
Thank you, and I really appreciate Cameron giving us the big picture about why we would do this. I think talking about the sort of narrow question of the code itself, if we think about where the code came from, the code provisions naming ordinance, it came out of kind of a unique situation, although I perhaps didn't realize how unique it was at the time. We had built a new park in East Anchorage that had been sort of colloquially referred to as Muldoon Town Square Park, but hadn't actually been named. And so the neighborhood worked with Aaron Leggett to come up with its current name, Anchorage Muldoon Park, based on the Denino word. And I think that conversation led to the ordinance, and the ordinance was contemplating mostly naming new facilities. But the truth is, we don't have many new facilities. It's relatively infrequent that we build new parks or that we dedicate new parks or other new public facilities. So I think the issue of renaming is more thorny. And I like the idea that John had mentioned, or sort of a spin on that, which is if we were to have some kind of standing panel as opposed to like these temporary naming panels, a standing panel that would work with elders and culture bearers and other leaders in the Alaska Native community, particularly Native Village of Eklutna, and say, where are the important sites, the important names, and which facilities could we rename or have a joint name like we have at Muldoon to the indigenous name, and come up with a list of like, here are the top 10 or top 20 priorities, and then we start to work through that. And then that would be a little bit separate from what Chris is talking about, which is, when someone like Betty Davis, for example, when she passes away, and we feel it's really important that we honor her, there are these temporary naming panels, and perhaps they should consider indigenous names in some cases. But it's also clear that their purpose is a little bit distinct from what I would envision as a standing panel. But that's just one. This is one idea. I'm not wed to it, but I think that might be one way to structure an ordinance. Thank you.
Thanks, Forrest. Any other discussion on this topic before we move on?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would add just one last wrinkle, if I might. The kind of blend or merger between the two concepts or two tiers, if you will, is that we should figure out a way in almost every case, and early and often and as often as possible, identify traditional names that go with the infrastructure, with the facilities, with the signage as we can. And we should try to find a way to build that into our process as robustly as possible so that it becomes the norm as opposed to the extraordinary. And, J-Bear is the first one who did it in the community. The signs on the entrance to the base say it. And as Mr. Dunbar said before, we should enter into a conversation about roads, or somebody did. And so I would hope that we get to the point where we have a process that's very robust in renaming all kinds of things. If you go to Finland, and this is somewhat of a different phenomenon because of their history between Russia and Sweden and who's been the principality overruling them, all the street signs in some areas have 3 languages on them, and they are all effective in communicating to the various populations. And so I think we can get there, and that's maybe a whole other conversation separate from naming panels per se, but it's that larger, longer effort that I think Mr. Dunbar is talking about, and it's worthy digging into. Yeah, exactly, as Mr. Dunbar put in the chat, the new transfer station. And so, and I'm sure that there are some amazing words in Dena'ina about, transforming and maintaining and stewarding your environment. And so, awesome, thank you.
Thanks. Cameron?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a piece, and this may be a little bit uncomfortable, but I wanted to make sure that we're recognizing the sort of the painful nature of this. And that, I recently listened to a whole story about Germany and about how they have looked at their national and local policies as it relates to language and as it relates to there was a woman that wrote a book about this in terms of how Germany can teach the world about some of this stuff. They have no Nazi statues there, even though it's a part of their history. That's not a part of their history they want to honor, right? And so they've thought about this a lot. And I think that as we think about this, I think it's really important to realize the painful nature of this, and that the naming of things is a continuation of a system that really sort of took over, right? And that led to boarding schools, led to the erasure of culture and languages and all kinds of things that are still very present today in communities across Alaska. And so it's just really important that it's not just a policy conversation and just a conversation about fairness, but it's a conversation about recognizing the history of this state and the history of this city, and being thoughtful about the fact that we need to make some difficult decisions to recognize and repair some of that. And so as much as it's not necessarily about saying that naming it after somebody today is certainly a great idea to honor them and that sort of thing, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done to repair the history of this state and to recognize the original people of this place. And I think that that's a history that I want my children to be proud of. I want them to be adults here and to live in a place that they can see that. And so sometimes we have these conversations like, well, let's recognize the pioneer and let's recognize the Alaska Native equally, right? Yeah, I think that that's okay to talk about the history, but I think it's really important to recognize that there's a lot of pain in there. There's a lot of pain in terms of what happened, and so it's just an important part of this conversation. So I think we need to keep in front of us. So thanks for letting me share that.
Great, thanks, Cameron. All right, so moving on to our last topic on the agenda, anti-racism and equity work, and I think naming panels fits squarely in that, but I'm glad that we lifted that up and spoke about that one separately. So I usually do this as a part of my Assembly Chair's report. In order to have more discussion, I've decided to move this to the quote-unquote other items part of our agenda. As most know, the application process has begun for the Chief Equity Officer. I'm not sure how long the application process will be open, but I am hopeful that the Assembly will have a name to review soon. Many of the issues that I've mentioned in past reports are relying on the Chief Equity Officer to come on board and help shepherd that work. I'll be reaching out to members soon about many of the ideas that were brought up at our Special Rules Committee meeting last week on this topic. But for now, just wanted to open the floor to see if anyone had anything they wanted to discuss right now. Otherwise, I think next month we'll have a more robust discussion on this topic.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Constantine, just for specificity, the job posting closes on Tuesday next week at 5 p.m. on March 2nd.
Great, thank you.
Do we know if we have a pool of applicants?
I am not sure if we do have a pool of applicants or not. I'm sure we could ask the administration and get that information from them. All right, not hearing anything, then we'll move on our agenda. So that completes our new business. We don't have anything under unfinished business. So we'll move on to audience participation. We'll do all of our virtual stuff first, and then we'll go to in-person. So Desiree, do we have anyone on the phone?
We have two callers. I'm going to unmute caller ending in 8902.
Welcome. You have 3 minutes. Would you like to share anything? 8902. All right, not hearing anything then. Who's the next phone that we have?
The next caller ends in 0522.
All right.
Hi, can you hear me?
Great, yes we can. Welcome.
All right, for the record, my name is Louis Imbriani. Hearing you guys talk about the roadmap to reopening for COVID is great. Back when this all started, we talked about preserving PPE. Then we talked about preserving our ICU bed capacity, which is all well and good. And it seems like that has been accomplished and that it's been expanded. Now it seems that we're at the point where we have the mindset, or at least it seems the mindset is that no one can get COVID. No one can get sick. It's unacceptable. While I would hope that no one gets sick, that's unreasonable and not a good expectation to have moving forward. Mr. Constant brought up a great point about being ahead of the curve, about finding which programs we didn't do well and which programs can do better if federal funds were to come in. Something that would really help these businesses is if we open them up to 100% capacity, allow them to run their business as they see fit. Out here in Wasilla, I'm out here today, people are still wearing masks. It's not a requirement, but people have chosen to do that. There are businesses that limit how many customers come in and go to a certain area because they've chosen to do that. We don't need helicopter parents teaching us or telling us how to run our business. The people of Anchorage have the ability to protect themselves, to protect their businesses, and to move forward. There's no need for a roadmap. All you have to do is let us go back to things as they were before. We're still going to have our COVID mitigation plans in place because we don't want people getting sick. We've identified the threat, we know how to handle it, and we want to move on. And all you guys have to do is let us move on. There's no need for you to feel comfortable about the state of things. Mat-Su Valley's been open, Kenai's been open, Fairbanks has been open. People are traveling. People are coming all over the place. The only place that's being shut down on a regular basis is Anchorage. And it's all because you guys let it happen. It doesn't need to happen. We can protect ourselves. You're just not letting us prove it. And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that completes our phone list. Yep, okay, do we have anyone on the Q&A? Okay, we don't have anyone on the Q&A. Then we'll go ahead and go to in-person. Welcome.
Can you hear me okay? Thank you. My name is Eugene Carl Haberman, Alaska resident for over 43 years. I'm going to focus on COVID, as you probably would expect me to address, and the remarks that were said at the last meeting. Now, if you pull into the ADN site, Anchorage Daily News site, online, you'll see dramatic concerns about what's going on in the valley and the count. That is, they're taking the lead on the number of cases. That's what's happening. As I report to you, you've got a tough job in the municipality of Anchorage, the community, people who live here, in dealing with COVID, particularly when it's a wild, wild west out in the valley. Over 100,000 people live there, and most people there are, and particularly politicians out there, are taking a different path of let it be. We're going to just not enforce anything, and it'll be a wild, wild west. Now, recently we've heard scenarios of a governor getting infected with COVID, and I wish him a speedy recovery with all due respect. But it noted that there were meetings out in the valley last weekend that he attended. There's a secrecy of what meetings he attended, but I could tell you about 2 meetings that it did held in Saturday. And that was one of the city council, special meeting of the city council of Palmer out there in the morning, where you cannot speak by phone. You have to be physically there. There's no requirement of masks, social distancing. It's a very small room. But also the Municipal Borough had a special meeting at Menard Center, not where it normally is. And the result is I did not attend that meeting. And then they had no ability for people to call in to testify. You had to be physically there. And we have, and when I say we, Alaskans, in dealing with COVID, we cannot walk away from this situation. We need to be responsible. Now, there's sentiment among assembly members at the last meeting that appeared to say, let's walk away and not wear mask requirement. That's already was evident in the assembly meeting as far as dialogue and where the assembly wants to go. This is very, very alarming. Yes, people are being vaccinated, but the vaccinated people are being informed too is don't take those masks off. You still can be infected, and you still can affect others. This is not the time to do that. And also it's alarming with the tourism, only 20 seconds left on that, where they're spending money to bring people to Alaska. But remind you, in Canada, they closed the doors on cruise ships. We have to recognize that we need to carefully deal with it, but also be handling respectfully the hardship that's facing the businesses and people working in Alaska. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I think that completes our audience participation. Thanks everyone for participating, and thanks to the members for a great committee meeting. With that, sure, go ahead.
So we had one comment on the Q&A, and it says, how can the mayor justify implementing rules that discriminate against private school 3A teams whose rivals are mostly outside of the municipality? Our daughter's volleyball team played 3 games against the only other private school that they can play in town. Our other daughter's cheer team has not been allowed to have home games because almost all of the teams they play are outside of the municipality. Therefore, they cannot cheer. This is not equity. This is discrimination. Cheer and volleyball may not seem like a big deal to you, but they're huge issues for my children. How can you justify these extreme measures that hurt our youth?
Thank you. Was that anonymous or was there a name? Okay. Well, thank you, anonymous, for that comment. Okay. So with that, that completes audience participation. Thanks everyone for a great committee meeting. We're going to go ahead and adjourn, and I will see everyone for our only work session today at 1:45. Thanks, everyone.